just as a baseline. So, a, a price to rent ratio below 15 means it's much better to buy, whereas a price to rent ratio of 21 or more means it's much better to rent. So you kind of have you have those extremes, and then you have some in the middle where it's a little bit more dependent on individual circumstances.
Welcome to CRE PN Radio for influential commercial real estate professionals who work with investors, buyers, and sellers of commercial real estate coast to coast. Whether you're an investor, broker, lender, property manager, attorney, or accountant, we're here to learn from the experts.
Welcome to Commercial Real Estate Pro Network's CRE PN Radio. Thanks for joining us. My name is Jay Gross. This is the podcast focused on commercial real estate investment and risk management strategies. Weekly, we have conversations with commercial real estate investors and professionals who provide their experience and insight to help you grow your real estate portfolio. Today's interview is sponsored by Building Insurance and Risk. When you invest in real estate, it pays to work with a real estate investor protection specialist to protect yourself and your investment from catastrophic loss. The experts at Building Insurance and Risk focus on real estate investor protection. They provide you with multiple insurance coverage offers and a side-by-side coverage comparison. To learn more, go to buildinginsurancerisk.com. Today, my guest is Jamie Seale. Jamie is a content writer at Clever Real Estate, the leading real estate education platform for home buyers, sellers, and investors. And in just a minute, we're going to speak with Jamie Seale about rent versus buy cities. But first, a quick reminder, if you like our show, CRE PN Radio, there are a couple things you can do to help us out. You can like, share, and subscribe, and we always encourage you to leave a comment. We love to hear from our listeners. Also, if you want to see how attractive our guests are, be sure to check out our YouTube channel. You can find us on YouTube at Commercial Real Estate Pro Network. And while you're there, please subscribe. With that, I want to welcome my guest, Jamie Seale. Welcome back to CRE PN Radio.
Yes, thanks for having me.
You bet. Looking forward to our conversation. Before we get started, if you could take just a minute and share with the listeners a little bit about your background.
Yeah, I am a content writer and editor at Clever Real Estate. I've been here about 3 years writing about anything home related, personal finance, generational home buying, and a couple fun studies sprinkled in between all of that.
Got it. All right. So today we're going to talk about the survey rent versus buy cities. And I'm curious, without having seen the study, I'm going to make just one kind of a hypothetical assumption here, and I'm going to ask: did you find that the coastal cities tend to be more rent versus like the Midwest versus being more of a buy kind of scenario?
Yes, that's a pretty good summation of what we found. A lot of the coastal cities, San Francisco, San Jose, Portland, Seattle, all those cities are much better for renting just because the prices of homes are so expensive, so high. And that's not to say that renting is easy in those cities, because rent prices are also very high in that area, but in comparison, yes, renting is much more affordable for most Americans.
Got it. Well, I say that not to like cut to the chase as much, but I was just kind of like going, okay, if I had to guess, just knowing what I know about cost of living, and just, as you go to the coast, it seems to be East Coast, West Coast. I think it's fairly similar versus like the Midwest. The affordability factor tends to change dramatically on the ends as opposed to the middle there. So let me ask you just a couple of questions about the study, and then let's get into the study. The nature of the survey. Tell us a little bit about the how you I guess the number of surveys, the how you find people to take the survey. Uh, Give us a little bit of the background there.
Right. So we do studies where we survey Americans. This one is more of a data collection survey where we just analyze the average home price in these cities versus the average rent price. And so we looked at the price to rent ratio and just calculated what that is by dividing the median home price versus the median annual rent. Um,
Okay. So not
yeah,
necessarily a survey as much as, I mean, like a participant reply as much as is kind of a market analysis. Uh,
exactly. Yeah. And
Okay.
so just as a baseline, so a a price to rent ratio below 15 means it's much better to buy, whereas a price to rent ratio of 21 or more means it's much better to rent. So you kind of have you have those extremes, and then you have some in the middle where it's a little bit more dependent on individual circumstances.
So if you take 15 versus 21 is somewhere around what is that, 18, kind of the midpoint? Is that kind of the tweener where you
Yes, anything
the
really from 16 to 20 it's usually typically better to rent with like that sort of score, but again, it just really depends on like your personal preference and um life stage and kind of what you're wanting out of your housing situation at that point.
got it. So before you reveal, I'm kind of curious, are there segments of the population that would be interested in yeah, I'm thinking like retirees versus yeah, kind of new in your career versus you're in your career and you've got kids, that kind of thing. Um, is Does it change, or is it more just a matter, doesn't matter, it's these cities, this is the result. If you live here it's better to buy, if you live here it's better to rent.
Right.
Or-
I think the situational aspect, as far as like if you're a young family or if you're a young professional, if you're a retiree, you might want to like try and find cities in that 16 to 20 range, where it's kind of it's you know it's more about what's best for you. Um, but of course, like a young professional that knows that Seattle is their long-term like home base, then um, it might be worth, going ahead and buying or like working up toward that. But if you're a young professional who doesn't really know where they want to settle down and you find yourself, say, on the West Coast, um, and are just gonna maybe try it out for a year or two, it would definitely be better to rent in that scenario. So it's helpful to know like what maybe is recommended, like when you're on those extremes. But again, the most important thing is that you do what's best for you financially in the long term. So that it
Got
really
it.
comes down to like knowing your your goals.
Know thyself. Gotcha.
Yes.
And as far as the survey results, I mean, the bottom line is affordability. Is that, I mean, if we look at rent versus buy, is that, or does it take into consideration any kind of long-term, uh, I'm assuming it's just like a flat out, here's on this day at this time when we took the data, this is the result. Uh,
Yeah.
that
For the most part, the price to rent ratio is like just a simple cost analysis of the median home price and the median annual rent at that certain date and time. But we did also try, like in a different section, try and factor in like home equity growth, and just the additional costs of home ownership, like, taxes and insurance and um, the cost of maintaining your home. And um, the results aren't significantly different, but it did kind of like narrow narrow the number of cities where it would be better to buy, if that
got
makes
it.
So we kind
Hey,
of have like a large-ish group of cities where just looking at the price to rent ratio is better to buy, but then when you consider all those extra costs of home ownership, that group significantly like gets smaller.
got it. And also in the comparison, are we trying to compare a similar size of home? I mean, number of bedrooms, or is there a
Right, we did not take that into consideration, just the median overall home price. So of course, yes, a larger home would be more expensive than a smaller home in pretty much any city you go to.
gotcha? Okay. Well, how best should we go through this? Do you want to do like a top 10 countdown, or do you want to go coast to coast, or how would you like to?
Let's maybe start with best cities for renting and then best cities for buying.
All right. Renting. What do you got?
Okay, so renting, we have about 9 cities where they scored above a 21, meaning it's much better to rent in these cities. Obviously, San Jose, San Francisco, LA rank number 1, 2, and 3. Um, their price, like San Jose, has the highest price to rent ratio at over 37. And like we talked about earlier, this very much like makes sense because home prices are like over 1.5 million or 1.5 million, excuse me. So that is, much too high for what the average American can afford. Um, but like we have a lot of other West Coast cities. Seattle is number 4, Salt Lake is number 5, San Diego 6, Portland is 7, 8 is Denver, and 9 is Austin, which is one of the few southern cities that is really very expensive to buy a home.
So you said Salt Lake and Denver. I know those are two kind of attractive areas for a lifestyle kind of thing. I'm surprised. I guess I wouldn't have assumed Salt Lake to get on that list. I could see Denver just knowing what I know. Uh, how,
Yes, so I will
so
say Salt Lake, um, of all of those cities where it's much better to rent, Salt Lake has the lowest rent prices at $1,700 a month, which is about half of what you'd pay in San Jose for rent. So it is on the list, but it might be one of the cheaper cities on the list to rent.
yeah. You mentioned there was a city between Salt Lake and Portland. I didn't catch that. What was the
San Diego.
San Diego? Okay. So primarily these are all West Coast unaffordable. It's kind of what I'm seeing with the exception of Salt Lake and Denver.
Yeah.
Um,
And
oh, it's San Antonio. Or did you say or
Austin.
Austin? Yeah.
Yeah. And um my guess is you read about this narrative a lot in the news and it very much might be true, but a lot of these um cities are kind of um relocation hotspots for people leaving California. So you have a lot of wealthy um individuals moving into these areas, which may be increasing home values. So it could be that aspect kind of making these homes really skyrocket in value.
Sure. And I'm kind of curious on that. The inward migration. Do you think any of that's putting pressure on the rents? I mean, and then as I asked that, I'm going, well, that's not necessarily true because I know like San Francisco still expensive, but I know there's been a lot of resistance or exodus from some of these cities, but still they're expensive. I mean, the rents haven't just plummeted because people have left.
Right,
Um,
yeah, I think it's all kind of basic supply and demand. If you can't afford a home in these cities, there's going to be a lot of demand for apartments for rental homes, which is going to raise those prices as well.
Got it. So, where is the first East Coast city? We've gotten over to Austin, as far east as you've gotten on the top 10 there. At what point does an East Coast city land on the list?
So for specifically for renting,
Right.
okay. Let me check. Honestly, it's very surprising. Um, you would expect New York, for example, to be on our best cities for renting list, but it's actually on our best cities for buying list.
Wow.
Yeah, and
Shocker.
yeah, it was actually one of the more, I think, surprising things that we found. And let me check, but it's just a matter, I think, of, in that case, rent. I mean, obviously, home prices are still very, very high in New York. I believe that the median is over $500,000, but the rent is also very expensive. It's the second highest rent behind San Jose. So New York rent is over $3,300 a month. So when you take those two numbers in comparison, it actually the price to rent ratio is actually like 14.5. So it's almost like the rent is so expensive in New York that it makes buying a home, which is also very expensive, worth it.
Sure. No, I would think that would be, primary driver there is which makes more sense.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the buy list then. The fact that you said New York's on a buy list, uh,
Yeah.
you piqued my
So
interest.
yeah, so interestingly enough, that's honestly, well, okay, Miami is also on that list, which was kind of surprising.
Before we jump into that, you gave the score for San Jose at 37. What
Mhm.
what did Austin come in at?
Austin was right at 21. So it was kind of on the edge
Okay.
where it could be better for renting, or it like just may be better for renting.
More like what's your strategy for, are you going to be there for a long time or not, kind of thing.
Right.
So, okay. All right,
Yeah.
let's hear more
Okay.
about your buy list here.
So for best cities for buying, we have 18 on our list that all have a price to rent ratio of 15 or below. The top two cities are Cleveland and Pittsburgh, which aren't necessarily surprising, but we have Chicago at number 3, um, New Orleans number
So,
4, Memphis
Jamie,
at
excuse me, before
5.
you run down the list here real quick. So, uh, Columbus and Pittsburgh, what was their score on
Yeah,
the?
Cleveland was number 1. It had a price to rent ratio of 11, which was the lowest among any city studied. And then we had Pittsburgh at 11.9.
Okay, I didn't mean to interrupt you there. I just wanted to
Yeah,
kind of
that's
get that.
okay.
All right, so Cleveland, Pittsburgh, what let's go down the rest of the list.
Chicago at number 3, New Orleans at number 4, Memphis number 5, Birmingham at number 6, Detroit at number 7, St. Louis at number 8, Cincinnati at number 9, Indianapolis at number 10. And I can keep going, but those are the top 10.
You mentioned 18. What was the number 18?
18 was Hartford, Connecticut. So that's another East Coast city that didn't make it onto the best cities for buying list.
And what was their score?
They were 14.8, so just under that 15 cutoff.
So literally, I mean, that's a pretty strong list of buy cities from 11 to just under 15. Where were New York? Where was New York? And you said Miami was on the list too.
Yes, Miami was number 11 and New York was number 16. And New York's price to rent ratio was 14.5. So again, it's kind of just right under that cutoff.
Hmm. Well, from a uh, just kind of a 30,000 foot view, uh, it looks like that all things being equal, I'm kind of curious before I say this, what was the date that the information was, or were we talking a particular year, particular day? What was the time
Yes.
frame of the?
This analysis, the data was retrieved from the US Census Bureau in let's see, the most recent Census Bureau data as of late August.
So August 24?
August 26th, or yes, August 26th, 2024.
24. Okay. Interesting. Because interest rates and all that stuff, I was kind of curious if that wouldn't change some of the if this was taken 2 or 3 years ago and interest rates were substantially lower, I could see it changing the picture. But if
And
that's
again, um, again, just to clarify, this is just from a like median home price versus
right.
median rent price. When you do take in interest and property taxes and insurance, we found that only two cities are better for buying, Cleveland and Pittsburgh.
Okay. Okay. So that is kind of the rest of the story, kind of a situation there, at least. And I think that while there are additional costs, there's also additional benefits of ownership if your strategy is long term. If you're only going to be somewhere short term, or the tax uh, benefit with interest write-off. Um, there are some things to consider, but if you're only going to be somewhere short term, your transaction cost of buying and selling can you know fully uh, undo the any kind of benefits of that. So that makes sense.
Yes, that's absolutely true. So there is a lot more to consider than just, this is the price of the home versus the price of renting.
Got it.
And
Got it.
it's hard to collect all of that in one survey. We did our best, but this gives you a general idea.
Yeah, well, that's interesting. I would think that anybody listening, if you're an investor and you're buying rental properties, there's a strong case to be made for demand is still strong in these cities, and even the cities that we mentioned that are better for buying. It's not inordinately substantially better. It's kind of all right. I guess like you said, Pittsburgh and Cleveland. It's or Columbus. Was it Cleveland or Columbus? I can't read my writing there.
Cleveland, yes, you got
Cleveland.
it.
Okay. Okay. Cleveland and Pittsburgh clearly are still probably more of a buy city. Um, but I'm assuming even in those property or in those cities, the cost of a property to buy for rent would be uh, you know, more affordable than it would be than if you were buying something in San Jose to rent, to put into rent kind of thing. So,
And
something.
I do want to just say two things about Cleveland and Pittsburgh. When we do take into account the interest, taxes, and insurance cost, the savings from buying really aren't that much. Like in Cleveland, with like the entire mortgage payment, you're only saving about $96, which is just a little over $1,000 a year. And in Pittsburgh, it's even less. So again, it's technically better to still buy there, but again, that's not I mean, that's a lot of money for a lot of Americans, but it is not necessarily significant savings. So again, it kind of comes down to what you want out of your living situation.
Got it. Hey, out of curiosity, 11 through 18 there, we said Miami is 11, New York is 16, Hartford, Connecticut is 18, I believe. What were the fill-ins between number 12 and number 17?
Yeah. Buffalo is number 12. Philadelphia is 13. Tampa is 14. 15 is Oklahoma City. New York is 16. Louisville, Kentucky is 17, and Hartford is 18.
Hmm. So
So we
clearly
found,
not, yeah, not
oh, go ahead.
all Midwestern cities. I mean, you got, like I said, Hartford, New York, Tampa, Miami. I mean,
Yeah.
uh, that's
We
interesting.
generally find that most of these cities for buying are kind of concentrated in the South or in the like Rust Belt area, granted with a few outliers, such as um, New York, um, Philadelphia, a few
Yeah.
others.
Well, it's interesting. Like I said, I would have assumed that there would have been none of the coastal cities on the list for the buy list. I would have thought it would have been, 100% coastal on the rent, Midwest on the buy. But clearly that's not all the case. Interestingly, too, when you like I said, when you add in the actual cost of ownership, it does even shorten the list a little bit more there. Um, but again, I guess it's all a matter of what your strategy, what your plans are for your living situation going forward, and what makes sense for you.
Right.
Um, any other nuggets that you care to share with us as far as what you learned from this?
I think that is, those are the main findings. I thought it was interesting that, there are housing affordability is a problem across the US. There are still pockets of affordability. They're just very few and far between, but it's worth looking into cities that you maybe didn't expect to be able to afford. Like maybe that's not the case for you. It's just really a matter of um, doing your research and crunching the numbers.
Got it. Jamie, by day, I'm an insurance broker. And if we could, I'd like to shift gears. I guess I want to say that first. But like I said, by day, I'm an insurance broker. And as such, I work with my clients to assess risk and determine what to do with the risk. And there's three strategies we typically consider. We first look to see if there's a way we can avoid the risk. If that's not an option, we look to see if there's a way we can minimize the risk. And if we're not able to avoid nor minimize the risk, we look to see if there's a way we can transfer the risk. And as such, I like to ask my guests if they can look at their own situation. Could be, the market, um, the, the, I don't know, I'm trying to think of what it might be in what you deal with, but the market, interest rates, the Fed, but whatever it is that you identify and consider to be the biggest risk. And again, for clarification, while I am an insurance broker, I'm not necessarily looking for an insurance related answer. And so if you're willing, I'd like to ask you, Jamie Seale, what is the biggest risk?
That's it's a tough question. I will tie it back to real estate because I feel like that's um, what we're talking about here with this study, what I do. And I think buying a home is a huge financial decision. It's a lot of money, a very long-term commitment. So I think the biggest risk is probably just getting yourself into a situation where you have more house than you can afford. Maybe it's, buying a $1.5 million home in San Francisco, when there are much more affordable options in Cleveland. But I think it's very important to stick to your budget, crunch those numbers ahead of time, and know what you can afford, know what interest rate you can afford, and what sort of mortgage you're going to be able to afford long term, taking into account the unexpected and hidden costs of home ownership. You don't want to find yourself, house poor, I guess, for lack of a better word. But just, yeah, doing your research ahead of time, and really not getting yourself into a situation where you can't, afford a place to live, I think it's a great way to minimize that risk.
No, well said. I mean, live within your budget. Makes a lot of sense there, and know what your plans are. That's good. Jamie, where can the listeners go if they'd like to learn more or connect with you?
Yeah, you can connect with me on Twitter at Jamie Dunaway, my maiden name, or on LinkedIn at Jamie Seale.
Got it. Well, Jamie Seale, I cannot say thanks enough for taking the time to talk. I've enjoyed it, learned a lot, and look forward to doing it again soon.
Yes, thank you.
All right. For our listeners, if you like this episode, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Remember, the more you know, the more you grow. That's all we've got this week. Until next time, thanks for listening to Commercial Real Estate Pro Network's CRE PN Radio.
You're listening to CRE PN Radio for influential commercial real estate professionals. For more information on this or any of our guests, like us on Facebook, CRE PN Radio.